I used to think nothing could surprise me anymore, especially after growing up in a family that always prioritized everyone else's feelings over mine. But then came one fateful Sunday dinner that shattered that illusion. It made me realize, even when you think you've retreated far enough to protect yourself, they can still find a way to break through. That evening, we were all sitting around the dinner table as usual. The smell of roast meat and cornbread filled the air, silverware clinked gently, and the low hum of the TV played the evening news in the background. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary, until my mom set her spoon down, glanced at my dad, and then they both turned to me, as if they had just remembered something. "Oh, by the way," my mom said, her voice oddly casual, "Vanessa will be staying at your apartment for a while, okay? Just a few months." I thought I misheard. I turned to Vanessa, my younger sister, who was calmly chewing on a piece of chicken. She looked up and gave a little smile. "Yeah, you're barely home anyway. I just need a bed and some space to get back on my feet." No one asked me. Not a single person looked at me long enough to notice I was turning to stone right there at the table. I hadn't even opened my mouth before my dad chimed in, as if everything had been settled long ago. "Next week is a good time to move. Vanessa's already made a list of what she needs to bring. Besides, your place has that extra room." I pressed my lips together, a lump forming in my throat. It wasn't about the space. It wasn't that I hated my sister. It was the way they spoke about my life, as if I didn't exist. As if I were just a storage unit they could access anytime they liked. No need to knock, no need to ask. I gave a small nod, smiled faintly. No one noticed that I was already making plans. They were too used to me being silent, never pushing back. Have you ever sat at a family dinner table and realized they were making plans to let someone else live in your home, as if you were invisible? If you have, then you know exactly what that moment feels like. And if you haven't, stay with me. Because this is the story of what happens when a quiet woman finally draws a line for herself. Late, perhaps, but better late than never. And if you've ever been the one overlooked, if you've ever felt like a shadow in your own family, leave a comment. I want to hear your story. Hit like, share this, because someone out there might need to know they're not alone. My name is Madison. I'm 32 years old, the middle child of 3 siblings, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one no one has to worry about. Not because I was perfect, simply because I never caused trouble. I didn't make mom cry, didn't embarrass dad in front of the neighbors, didn't leave a mess for everyone else to clean up. I studied on my own, applied to college by myself, worked part-time to pay for my dorm because, as mom put it, "Vanessa's going through a rough patch right now, honey, so try to manage on your own, okay?" I got used to being seen as stable, and in my family, stable was just a nicer word for invisible. Vanessa is the youngest, 4 years younger than me, and I say this without malice, but probably with the full agreement of my entire family. If there were an Olympic gold medal for making the worst life choices, Vanessa would be breaking records. She dropped out of college because she felt trapped, moved in with a guy she'd known for 3 weeks only to break up 2 months later, borrowed money from everyone to start a healing podcast, and most recently got fired for live streaming a rant about her ex-boss on Instagram. But my mother still cradles Vanessa like she's a child who just fell off her bike. Poor baby, she just hasn't found the right environment yet. Every time something happens, the whole family scrambles to pull her out of another rough phase. And Kyle, the oldest, honestly, I don't even know where to start. Kyle is the kind of guy who, at 35, still lives at home, uses the garage as his gaming cave, and considers putting gas in mom's car a productive day. He's so lazy, he doesn't even know how to turn on the washing machine, yet somehow, he's treated like the man of the house. I remember one weekend during my sophomore year of college, I came home for a short visit, right when Kyle had the flu. I hadn't even put my bags down when Mom shoved a container of porridge into my hands and said, "Make this for Kyle, would you? I'm exhausted." While I was sweating over the stove, Vanessa was painting with watercolors in the garden. Dad was watching baseball, and Mom was out front telling the neighbors, "Thank goodness for Madison, she always takes care of herself." I grew up in the kind of family where every effort I made was treated as expected, never celebrated. I remember the first time I got promoted. I was so excited I called home to share the news. My dad said, "Yeah? So, how much are you saving now?" My mom asked, "Vanessa's still job hunting. "Do you know any companies that are hiring?" And that was it. No one asked if I was tired, if I was happy, or if I was proud of myself. I once gave up my bedroom so Vanessa could have a place to stay after her first breakup. I once volunteered to babysit Kyle's kids so Mom could attend a neighbor's wedding. I once spent 2 full days scrubbing and decorating the entire house for Thanksgiving, because if Madison's handling it, we know it'll get done. All of it happened without anyone asking if I had the time, or if I even agreed. I'm not a saint. I've had moments of frustration and anger, but whenever I said no, it was like I had shattered some sacred cosmic order. "What's wrong with you?" my mom would ask. "Is something going on at work?" my dad would prod. Kyle would scoff with that condescending laugh. Vanessa would fake tears. So, I learned to smile, softly, step back, get it done. And slowly, I became a shadow of myself inside my own family. When I finally scraped together enough money to buy a small condo in Mission Hills, San Diego, it wasn't just a property. It was a milestone. The first territory in my entire life I could truly call mine. No one could touch it. No one could make decisions for me there. I thought that would be enough. That if I kept my distance, lived independently, never relied on them, they'd leave me alone. But I was wrong. They didn't just cross boundaries. They just didn't see them. They treated that condo like it belonged to the family and assumed I would share it whether I agreed or not. And that night at dinner, when they casually announced Vanessa would be staying at my place for a while, I realized something. If I didn't act now, they would keep repeating this, over and over again. I'm not 22 anymore, and I refuse to live as a shadow one moment longer. I remember exactly how it felt the morning after that fateful dinner, waking up to sunlight filtering through the curtains, coffee in hand, and a slow-burning anger lodged somewhere deep in my chest. My apartment was still as quiet as ever, but the quiet no longer felt like peace. It was the stillness before a storm, and I was done pretending the sky was still blue. I looked around the small space I had built over the past 7 years. A 1-bedroom condo in Mission Hills, San Diego. Not luxurious by any means, but it was a journey. I had started from nothing, working long hours, taking on freelance projects, saving every penny just to afford the down payment. Every lamp, every book on the shelf, every tile in the kitchen, I picked them, I chose them. And with just one sentence, "Vanessa will be staying for a while." They wanted to make it no longer mine. To my parents, the apartment was just a place to stay. But to me, it was the first thing I'd ever had that no one else touched. It was the proof that I could stand on my own without loans, without help, without needing permission. And now, they wanted to hand it to someone else, because I'd gotten too used to sacrificing. I tried to stay calm in the days that followed. At Wednesday lunch, Mom called over video, munching on a salad while sharing that Vanessa was under a lot of stress, homeless, low on cash, while my room was just sitting there. She added with that loaded tone of hers, "You're barely home anyway, always working. It's such a waste for a 1-bedroom to sit empty, and sisters should support each other in tough times, right?" I smiled softly. "Sure, Mom, I'll think about it." But in my mind, red warning lights were flashing. There was nothing to think about. They'd already made the decision. That afternoon, Vanessa texted me. No pretense, no small talk, just straight to the point. "I only need a few months, then I'll move out." "You don't mind, right?" No, I didn't just mind. I was furious at how they always assumed I didn't feel hurt. Furious at how my sister thought she could just walk into my life like a guest of honor without even asking, "How do you feel about this?" I don't know why in this family, every time I say no, it's taken as a lack of love, as if boundaries mean selfishness. But I was too exhausted to keep playing the role of the strong sister, the one everyone leans on but no one ever really looks at. 3 days later, Dad called. "I think you should be a bit more flexible," he said. "Our family doesn't have much. You're the most successful one, and you live alone. Help your sister get through this rough patch. Once Vanessa's back on her feet, she'll move out." Then he ended with the sentence I'd heard my whole life. "It's not that big a deal. You've never complained before." Because I never complained, they assumed I agreed. That's when I started to realize this wasn't just some minor disagreement. This was an exact replica of dozens of times before, when I was pushed aside, expected to yield, treated as the unnecessary piece in decisions about my own life. No one believed I had a right to choose. They made plans, decided things, and only when everything was already arranged would they inform me, like a late-stage radio announcement. Not to ask for permission, but to give me time to get ready. But I wasn't a freshman anymore, begging Mom for $50 to buy textbooks. I was a grown woman with a full-time job, paying my own bills, living by rules I'd built for myself. And now, they were trying to rip those rules apart, as if I'd never existed at all. I didn't react. I didn't argue. I stayed silent, but not out of resignation this time. This time, I was preparing. Vanessa sent the next message 3 days later. I think you should toss out that old couch of yours. It's super dated. I'm thinking of ordering something more modern, brighter, with a more feminine vibe. My heart thumped as I read it, not from sadness, but because part of me laughed. My couch, in my apartment. And now my sister was treating it like a communal item she had the authority to discard. She didn't just want to crash at my place. She wanted to redesign it, with her erratic taste no less, like it was her personal canvas. I stared at that message, and in that moment I knew. This wasn't about cohabitation anymore. This was an invasion. A soft takeover wrapped in the polite packaging of family. As to be the girl who couldn't say no to anyone. But I couldn't live like that anymore. Because if I didn't speak up this time, there would be nothing left in my life that was truly mine. I didn't respond to Vanessa's text. I didn't return my mother's missed calls. I didn't show up for the next family dinner they invited me to. I needed space. I needed to think. And truthfully, I was seriously weighing how to protect my home when the intruder wore my last. I thought they would interpret my silence as refusal, but apparently I had overestimated how much they respected me. A week later, while I was working from my usual cafe near the office, my mom called. Her voice sounded almost cheerful. Your dad and I talked. This weekend works best to move Vanessa's things. Your cousin has a pickup truck. Your dad already asked to borrow it. Saturday morning should do it. I set my latte down. My hand trembled slightly. There wasn't a single question in her voice. No hint that this was a discussion. It was an order. A decision made and stamped by the family council. A council I clearly didn't belong to. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my tone calm. I'll have to check my lease. The building might not allow long-term guests without registration.
Just say.
It's a friend staying over. Mom dismissed it quick and breezy, like I was making excuses. Besides, you're barely home anyway. It's a waste to leave that room empty. I wanted to scream, but I knew the louder I got, the more they'd frame it as an emotional outburst. And then the old script would play again. Don't be so dramatic. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? So, I only said, let me check, okay? On the other end, Mom hummed vaguely. I could hear her turn to Dad and say, she didn't say no, so I think we're good. I hung up, sat frozen, staring at the stream of strangers walking past the cafe window. And in that moment, I felt like that 8-year-old girl all over again, giving up her bedroom for Vanessa because she's younger and needs the space. Only this time, I wasn't a child anymore, and that room didn't belong to our parents, it was mine. That night, Vanessa sent me a list. Can you clear out a section of your closet for me? I've got a lot of skincare and loungewear to bring. Then another message. I'm gonna toss that desk you're using, okay? I already ordered a new one, had it shipped straight to your address. Easier that way. Not a single, how do you feel about this? Not a single, do you agree? She was acting like I was the short-term tenant in my own home and she was the new manager of the entire operation. I opened her email, titled, For Temporary Stay, 3-6 months, with an itemized list like it was an Airbnb proposal. Makeup, a full-length mirror, a vanity table, bookshelves, special pillows aligned with her personal feng shui, and a cat named Luna, without asking if I was allergic. Piece by piece, I was being moved out of the life I had built for myself. That night, I took out my notebook, flipped to a blank page, and started planning. Not a protest plan, but a protection plan. Quiet, but unshakable. I'm not someone who picks fights, but I know better than anyone what it feels like to have your right to exist quietly taken from you. And this time, I wasn't going to let them do it again. I wouldn't stop them with arguments. I'd stop them with facts, with policies, building rules, lease clauses, and meticulous preparation. Because I wasn't just protecting my apartment. I was protecting my right to exist within a family that constantly forgot I had feelings too. that I had boundaries, and that I had the right to say no. I knew that as long as I stayed quiet, they'd assume I was okay with everything. And that's exactly what happened. The next day, my mom sent me a photo of a pastel pink vanity and casually asked, "Thinking of ordering this one for Vanessa, okay? Super cute. Would look great in your apartment." I texted back one word, "Sure." By now they were fully in action mode. Vanessa kept sending shopping links, throw pillows, bed sheets, an essential oil diffuser. Dad called asking for my building's exact address and gate code. Mom ordered an Uber to test how long it takes from the bus station to your place. I started getting delivery notifications from Amazon, Target, Wayfair, all addressed to my home. I didn't stop anything, but inside I was getting ready. That evening, I sat quietly in the apartment, looking at every familiar corner they were planning to replace with someone else's tastes. I didn't cry. I had no tears left for this feeling. I just felt cold. Cold and strangely clear-headed. I opened my laptop and logged onto the building management's website. Since I was the primary leaseholder, I had access to the full list of policies. A small line, barely noticeable but packed with power, appeared on the screen. No long-term guests, over 14 consecutive days without an approved sublease and formal authorization from management. I took a screenshot, saved it. Then I drafted an email. "Hello, my name is Madison Lee, current tenant of Unit 3. See, I'd like to confirm the policy regarding long-term guests and the process for subleasing if necessary. I'm concerned about potential overstay from visiting family members beyond the allowed period." Less than an hour later, the building manager replied, "Thank you for reaching out, Ms. Lee. As stated, any occupant staying beyond 14 days must have a signed sublease, undergo background checks, and receive management approval. Otherwise, it will be treated as a lease violation." I read the message again and again. It felt like the first shield had just been raised. Next, I called Travis, a coworker of mine who had just gone through a breakup and was looking for temporary housing after his ex kicked him out of their apartment. I'd known Travis for 3 years. He worked in the financial planning department, steady, clean, quiet. Ideal. "Travis," I said over the phone, "you're still looking for a short-term place, right? My apartment has an open room, and I could use someone legitimate staying there for a while." He hesitated. "What are you getting at?" I smiled faintly. "Would you be open to being a legal subtenant? Proper paperwork and everything. You move in, and I step back from the battlefield for a bit." We met the next day and signed a clear agreement. Travis would live in the apartment, fully in line with the building's policies. His name was added to the lease as an official subtenant. I notified management. They approved it quickly after a routine background check. I had never felt more at peace. 3 days before Vanessa's scheduled move-in, I hired a technician to install security cameras, one above the door, one in the living room, and one in the kitchen. All were connected directly to my phone. I didn't need recordings. I just wanted to know who came and went from my home. On the final night before the landing, I gathered all my personal documents: passport, employment contracts, savings book, email folders, and bill records. Everything was packed up and placed into a small safe, which I stored in the trunk of my car. I also cleared out all my jewelry and valuables, locked the drawers, changed the passcode to my mini safe. I wasn't accusing anyone of anything, but after a lifetime with a family that could twist anything into, Madison is over. I'd rather be cautious than sorry. At night, I booked a hotel room near the beach in Coronado. Not far, but far enough. Far enough to stay out of the chaos. I wanted to observe from a distance. I wanted to watch, clearly, calmly, how they would react when they realized they no longer had full control. Early that morning, I received a text from Vanessa. Arriving around 9:30, make sure the hallway's clear so it's easy to carry stuff in. Don't lock the door, Kay. Love you. I didn't reply. I was sipping my coffee, sitting by the third-floor window, watching the waves crash against the Coronado shore. At 9:32 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the door camera. A pickup truck had pulled up. My dad stepped out first, checking the elevator. Vanessa followed, wearing leggings and a hoodie, clutching a pastel-colored body pillow. My mom held a potted plant. They rang the doorbell, knocked, called, no one answered. Seconds later, the door opened, and in their eyes a complete stranger stood before them. "Hello," Travis said, polite but firm. I'm the legal tenant. No one else is currently permitted to stay in this apartment. My father frowned. Who are you? Travis Palmer, subtenant. Here's the lease, written approval from building management, and the list of authorized residents. My mother stammered. We're family. I'm sorry, Travis replied. But per building policy, no one not listed on the lease is allowed inside the unit for more than 24 hours. You're welcome to contact the primary tenant if needed. He closed the door, courteously, firmly. I watched everything through the camera feed. From my beachside hotel, I leaned back in the chair, my heart pounding. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't argued. I'd simply built a wall, using policy, preparation, and the one thing I had forgotten I possessed, the right to decide. I had never felt so clear. I sat in that small beachfront hotel room, my phone screen still streaming the live feed from the apartment's door camera. Everything was eerily quiet, despite the storm unraveling frame by frame on the other side of the screen. At 9:34 a.m., just after Travis closed the door, the hallway outside the apartment fell into a heavy, stunned silence. I watched as my mom turned to my dad, her eyes wide with confusion and disbelief. Vanessa stood frozen, still hugging that pastel pillow, looking as if someone had just stolen the spotlight from the performance she'd been preparing for months. My dad pounded on the door 2 more times, harder now. Madison, what is going on? No one answered. He looked straight into the camera. I saw his eyes, and I knew. He understood. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a miscommunication. This was a choice. Hadn't argued. I hadn't cried. I hadn't begged or backed down like I had so many times before. This time I simply stood up, quietly but unshakably. Travis inside stuck to the plan. He called building security just as we'd agreed in advance. It wasn't long before a security officer arrived. Through the camera, I could hear the conversation clearly. You're confirming you're the registered subtenant? Yes. Here's the lease and management approval. And them? They're not on any approved guest or resident list. The security officer turned to my family. I'm sorry, but per building policy, without the primary tenant's consent, or being on the authorized list, you are not permitted to access the unit. My mother started speaking quickly, her voice rising with anger. This is my daughter's apartment. She lives alone. There's no one else there. We're family. Family doesn't override the lease, ma'am, the officer interrupted, gently but firmly. If you do not leave, we'll be required to proceed with security protocol. I didn't hear Vanessa say anything. She just stood there, eyes wide, lips pressed tightly together. A part of me, the old soft part, wanted to run back, hug her, whisper, "It's okay, it's just a misunderstanding." But another part of me, the one I spent over 30 years trying to recover, kept me in that chair. And I knew this was right. At 10:10 a.m., the pickup truck pulled away from the apartment complex. A pastel body pillow had been left behind on the sidewalk, probably dropped in the scramble. I saw it through the camera. So small, like a tiny, leftover artifact from a war fought in silence. I turned off my phone. I didn't cry. I felt empty, but it was the kind of emptiness that comes after a space has been cleaned. Not triumphant, not guilty, just a quiet awareness that I had finally stepped through a threshold I'd spent my whole life afraid to face. That afternoon, I walked along the Coronado Beach. The sun was dipping low and the wind whipped across my face, and slowly, everything inside me began to settle, like sand smoothing out after a crashing wave. I got a message from Travis. They've left. No further trouble. I'll take good care of the apartment, and, "Are you okay?" I replied simply, "Okay, more than ever." A few hours later, I reopened Facebook, only to find a flood of unread messages waiting for me. Aunt Carol, Uncle Ben, even friends of my mother, people who normally never spoke to me, now chiming in with outrage. "Madison, how could you be so heartless?" "Heard you kicked Vanessa out? Unbelievable. No matter what happens, family is still family." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because here's what they didn't understand. Love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself until there's nothing left to give. Only one message made me pause. From Ethan, my cousin, Aunt Carol's son, one of the few in the family who ever saw me as a real person. "Hey, I don't know what happened exactly, but this is the first time I've seen my parents so shaken. Respect, 'cause I looked at his message and smiled, faintly. Sometimes, just one person understanding you is enough. That night I returned to the apartment to take over Travis's night shift. Everything was just as I left it. My pillow still sat on that old, tacky couch I'd never felt the need to replace. I lay down, took a deep breath, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt this was truly home. Not because no one else was here, but because I knew no one else could decide what happened here anymore. Except me. The next morning, as I was making coffee in the kitchen, my phone rang. It was my dad. I hadn't planned to answer, but something in me said, "Face it." I picked up. "Madison," he said, sharp from the start. No hello, not even a "how are you." "I don't understand what's going on. Who was that man in the apartment? A complete stranger. You let a man into your home and didn't tell the family?" I took a deep breath. "Travis isn't a stranger. He's my friend, and he's a legal tenant, fully approved under the building's lease agreement." My father practically shouted, "That apartment is yours. How could you let someone else in without telling us, without informing the family?" "This is betrayal, Madison. Betrayal." I froze. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened that made you do this?" Just betrayal. They didn't see that I was protecting myself. They only saw that I was no longer obedient. I hung up. Less than 10 minutes later, my mom called. The text came through just as I was standing in the kitchen, coffee cup trembling slightly in my hand. "How could you do this to your sister? Vanessa has no one but you, Madison. How can you be so heartless? She lost her job, got kicked out, and you give a stranger a place in your home instead of your own sister? We're beyond disappointed." I set the phone down on the table. My coffee went cold. My fingers were icy. I had expected pushback, but I hadn't expected them to turn so sharply, so completely. After years of silence, compliance, enduring everything quietly, now that I'd drawn a boundary, I had instantly become the villain. And then came Vanessa. She called me, but I didn't pick up. She left a voice message nearly 2 minutes long. Her voice broke from the very first sentence. "You really did this? I thought you were okay with it. Mom and Dad said you didn't object. I made all the preparations. I thought this was my chance to start over. Why would you choose some random guy over your own sister? You know I have nowhere else to go, no money." The logical conclusion I had been unable to untangle, I told myself then. I sat and listened to the entire message, then turned it off. I didn't reply. I stepped out onto the balcony. The San Diego wind whipped past me. My apartment was still intact. Travis was in the other room, quietly present. No yelling, no one rifling through drawers, no one replacing my things with some feminine vibe they picked for me. And I realized, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for protecting what was mine. They were angry, they lashed out, but I was still here, calm, solid as bedrock in the middle of the tide. Because I knew, their fury didn't come from something I did wrong. It came from the fact that I was no longer easy to control. I knew I couldn't hide forever, not because I felt guilty, but because I understood. If I ever wanted this cycle to end, I had to face them. 1 week after the failed move-in, I sent a message to my parents and Vanessa. "We need to talk. Sunday, 3 p.m., Paseo Cafe near my place. No arguing over the phone. If you want to understand..." I didn't respond. That day, the sky was overcast. I arrived early and chose a table inside, ordering an iced espresso. With my hand resting lightly on the table, I took a deep breath. Not from fear, but because I had been preparing for this moment for a long time. At 3:03 p.m. they walked in, all 3 of them. Dad, Mom, and Vanessa. They looked disoriented, not angry like in their messages, just lost. As if they'd built a massive wall, only to realize the one person no longer standing behind it was me. "What do you want to say?" Mom spoke first, placing her hand on her purse, her eyes skimming just shy of mine. I set my coffee down. "I'm going to speak very clearly. No yelling, no insult, just honesty." I looked at each of them. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a 10-year-old child on trial in a family courtroom. I was me, an adult, with boundaries, with the right to speak. Apartment is mine, legally. I lease it. I pay for it. No one, not even you, gets to decide who lives there except me. Dad grimaced. Madison, I raised my hand, gently but firmly. I'm not finished. I turned to Vanessa. She was looking down, fidgeting with her fingers. You didn't ask. You acted like it was already settled. You sent over packages, ordered furniture, made plans to redesign my space, and not once did you ask how I felt about any of it. Vanessa opened her mouth. I thought you were okay with it. Mom and Dad said you'd be fine. I interrupted, steadying my voice. You didn't think. You chose to believe the version that was easiest to hear, because you're used to being allowed to. My mom sighed, as if my composure offended her. We're family, Madison. How can you be so cold? I looked straight at her. I'm not cold. I'm clear. My whole life I've been called the strong older sister, expected to give in, to endure. No one asked if I was tired, if I was hurt. You all got used to my silence and used it as an excuse to pile more weight on me. Dad shook his head. You're being dramatic. No, I'm being truthful. I leaned back slightly, my voice lowering, not as a threat, but to mark the end. From now on, any decision that involves me, my time, my space, my property, or even my presence, requires clear consent. No assumptions, no reading between the lines, no I thought she'd be okay. Without that, I will treat it as a violation, and I will respond accordingly, legally and decisively. No one said anything. None of them were used to me having boundaries. Vanessa looked at me. For the first time, there was no resistance, no anger, just something that looked like regret. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I really thought you wouldn't mind. I'm used to people just being okay with it. I nodded. And now you know, I'm a person too. I need space. I need respect. My parents exchanged a look, then looked at me. They didn't add anything. Maybe they didn't fully understand. But at the very least, they knew. I wasn't stepping back into my old role. Not anymore. We left the cafe in silence. No hugs, no explosions, just a quiet shift from a habit of control to a new kind of reality. I know this much clearly, directly, and I don't regret it. Vanessa didn't move in. I think it's important to say that, not as a victory, but as a quiet relief. She found a small studio apartment about 20 minutes away, not fancy, not new, but hers. For the first time in her life, Vanessa was living without depending on anyone. Mom mentioned it in a brief call. Her voice carried no accusation anymore, just exhaustion. She's trying. Seeing a therapist weekly. Submitting job applications on her own. I didn't ask for more. Our relationship didn't magically heal after that coffee shop meeting. There was no cinematic ending, no tearful embrace to undo decades of invisibility. But something had undeniably shifted. They started to pause, before speaking, before deciding, before assigning me the same old role. That Christmas, for the first time, I wasn't automatically handed the responsibility of cooking dinner, not because they didn't need it, but because my mom called and asked, "What would you like to bring this year?" A small question, but it nearly made me cry. I chose pumpkin pie and kale salad, two dishes I liked making, not ones the family needed me to make. When I walked into the house, no one pointed me toward the kitchen. No one handed me a to-do list. My dad nodded in greeting. Vanessa gave me a soft smile, and my mom said, "Thank you for coming." My apartment is still the same old apartment, but it's no longer the place I ran to after every time I was invaded. Now it's truly home. I bought new curtains, finally printed and hung a few photos I'd always hesitated to frame. The tacky old sofa is still there, and I love it more each day. Because it's mine. No one else picked it out for me. Travis moved out after 2 months. When he left a handwritten note by the stove. "Thank you for letting me stay here, and for letting yourself stay here. Keep the apartment, but more importantly, keep your voice." I kept that note, framed it, placed it on my desk. I used to think strength meant sacrifice, endurance, being the bigger person. But now I understand, real strength is knowing how to say no. It's not waiting for others to understand before giving yourself permission to feel safe. It's refusing to play the supporting role in someone else's story, even when they call it family. When I walk through my apartment door each evening, I know this. I no longer have to lock myself away just to keep the peace. I just have to live in alignment with what I know is fair. And if you've made it this far, maybe you've done something similar. Or maybe you're standing right on the edge, unsure if you can draw that line. Just remember this. If you say no, they might resent you for a while. But if you don't, you'll resent yourself forever.